Justin Bieber, Harry Styles, Jack from Titanic, basically every guy on TikTok. What do all of these men have in common? Well, they have slightly feminized features, typically a more slender build without much gym training, and of course, thousands of girls are simping over them right now. Combined, these attributes can be put into one word: pretty boy. Now, based on this, the question I believe should be on every man's mind at the moment is, are pretty boys going to be the future of dating? Because when we look at the past, it's undeniable the popularity of pretty boys has exploded in the last 30 years. Therefore, it'd be highly valuable information to know whether this trend will continue to the point it becomes the meta for guys, or if it's overhyped and will eventually flatten out, or if it's just a fad and set for a full reversal. This will be important because it will allow you to plan ahead for the changes to come in the dating market. I have identified 3 convincing theories that can explain why we've seen this explosion in popularity recently. And it goes without saying, it wouldn't be the best idea to spend the next 5 years training to get the body of Arnold Schwarzenegger, only to find out by that time the meta has changed and there is no longer any demand for it. I'm not saying this will happen, but the answer will be explained in depth in this video for which theory is most accurate and therefore will show where the future lies for male beauty standards. Anyway, let's get this started. Theory 1. The birth control pill has made women significantly more attracted to pretty boys. This theory is the most scientific and attempts to explain women's attraction to men is heavily influenced by their hormones and biology. For those who don't know, the birth control pill massively suppresses a woman's estrogen levels. If you look at these 2 charts and focus on the pink, the first one shows a woman's estrogen over the span of a month when she isn't taking anything, and the second is when she's taking the medication daily. Now, ignoring the curvature of the first graph for 1 second, which I'll explain soon, it's clear to see at all points a woman's estrogen levels are higher when she's not taking any medication compared to when she is taking it. And the reason this happens is because when taking it, a woman essentially resets her calendar each day so her levels never rise. Now, why is this relevant? Well, estrogen is the female sex hormone. It increases their attraction for guys and in particular men with more masculinized features. In this article written by the evolutionary psychologist Sarah E. Hill, it states, research conducted on heterosexual women finds that, as estrogen increases across the cycle, so too does women's sexual desire and interest in cues of good genetic quality in men. In particular, this research finds that estrogen increases women's preference for men whose faces, voices, and behaviours exhibit cues to the presence of relatively high levels of testosterone. We're talking square jaws, deep voices, and swagger. Now, given this, it's clear to see how women's preferences in men will likely be very different when they are taking birth control. What the article writer is implying is when a woman's estrogen levels are at either of the 2 spikes of the graph, her levels of desire for masculine-looking men are at their highest. And interestingly enough, this first and more dramatic spike is actually when a woman is ovulating, which basically means she has the potential to get pregnant. Therefore, it makes sense for her desire of masculine-looking men to be increased here, as this is when she is looking for the strongest genes to produce children. Whereas, on the other parts of her cycle, she's more concerned with finding a provider. I talk more about this point in my other video on pretty boys versus hypermasculine. If you want to learn more in depth for why hypermasculine men are more desired when a woman can get pregnant, feel free to check it out after. Anyway, back to this point. What I'm trying to allude to is notice how even at the lowest parts of her natural cycle, her estrogen levels and therefore desire for masculine men are still higher than all parts of the second chart. And given the fact that today there are now more women on birth control than ever, this serves as strong evidence that Prettyboys will have seen an increase in popularity over the last 20 to 30 years. Furthermore, in another study where they had two groups of women, this confirmed this theory even more so, because at first they made both design on a computer the ideal looks of a male partner. Then, after this, one of the groups was forced to start taking birth control. Then, 3 months later, both groups were returned to repeat the exercise, and interestingly enough, for the women who were on birth control for 3 months, they adjusted their ideal quite substantially in the direction of a more feminine looking man. Meanwhile, for the control group, they kept their ideal pretty much the same. This shows again, there is evidence to suggest birth control makes women more attracted to feminized men. And lastly, one more piece of data I noticed is when you look at the age demographics of which women are taking birth control. There are 2 to 4 times as many women in their late teens, early 20s taking it than those 25 or above. And when you look at the women that are most attracted to Prettyboys, more often than not, it is these same women in their late teens and early 20s. Anyway, I think this theory holds a reasonable amount of weight, and the data is quite convincing. So, if this theory turns out to be true, it will likely mean the desire for Prettyboys will eventually flatten off. Because I believe for all the women who are already taking birth control, it's unlikely to decrease or increase by any significant amount in future. So, that's the first theory for why Prettyboys have rapidly increased in popularity since the turn of the century. Now moving to theory 2, wokeist propaganda. This theory states more or less, the wokeists of the world are trying to smash down barriers separating male and female, which in turn has allowed more room for men to feminize their appearance without any potential shame or backlash. The wokeists pushing this idea are everywhere, and I'm not talking about protesters. And not TV either, because let's be honest, no one watches TV anymore. I'm more talking about YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. These platforms that are most popular among young people. And these wokeists are dominating these platforms from both the bottom and top. From the bottom, the audience that consumes the content, and at the top, the creators and employees that make money from the businesses. Anyway, because of the wokeist propaganda, there is now more of a grey area for what defines male and female than at any other point in history. 100 years ago, it was completely black and white. Up until recently, this has become more and more grey. And as for the future, it's possible there will be no separation at all and it will be completely grey. Anyway, what this means is if you're a guy who wants to push the boundaries and appear slightly more feminine in appearance, you now have this option and can even be attractive to more women while doing so. Now, just to be clear, I'm not insinuating anything for whether what I've just said is good or bad. I'm just pointing out the fact that the wokeists of the world have allowed more leeway for men who want to follow the pretty boy niche. I mean, if you want to follow this path and think it will benefit your dating life, then by all means do it. I'm not being a masculinity coper by pointing out the direction I believe the world is heading. It's a matter of fact, if you're a guy who wants to become a pretty boy and believe you'll have an abundant dating life as a result of it, if anything, you've only got the wokeists of the world to thank for it. As 50 years ago, this wouldn't have been possible because you likely would have been ostracized. Anyway, to wrap up this point looking to the future, If this theory holds the most weight, it is likely Prettyboys will continue to see more popularity in dating, as the wokest of the world will only push their narrative even further. Finally, moving to theory 3. Demand increased because of celebrities, but supply will eventually catch up. And of the 3 theories, this is my personal favourite. It's a principle of economics that demand always moves quicker than supply. Demand, by nature, is extremely volatile. It can change any time, by any amount, and for any reason. But for supply, on the other hand, this is extremely slow moving. Observations, decisions, investments, and lifestyle changes all need to be made before supply can even begin to catch up with demands. Now, this concept applies in both dating and in the real-world economy. Because, just as a quick economic example, say an intense heat wave hits a city. Almost overnight, there will be an insane demand for things like aircon, water, and sunscreen. And though there will be at least some level of supply for these things already, from companies that had existing stock and were already producing them, there is no chance they'll be able to single-handedly match the huge influx of demands. Therefore, for the companies that were already in stock, they'll soon put their prices up, capitalise, and eventually sell out. But as for everyone else who wants to capitalise, chances are the heatwave will already be over before they get the opportunity to observe demand, invest in production resources, and sell stock to make a profit. So, the bottom line is, for the people who got in early through sheer luck of already being in supply, they get to capitalise on the massive new demand spawned. Meanwhile, for everyone else, they all need to play catch up in order to get a piece of the pie. Anyway, that's the economic example, and now you'll see in this next example the same thing happens in dating. So, taking it back to when Titanic was first released 25 years ago, which starred Leo DiCaprio playing the heartthrob pretty boy Jack, who at the time was arguably the first pretty boy ever to appear on the big screen. As this movie went on to break all box office records and was a huge success, I would anticipate overnight there became a huge spike in demand from women for guys who looked like this. Now, for the guys that just so happen to already be emulating this archetype, they would likely have received a new level of female attention they've never seen before. However, at the same time, this will unfortunately be short-lived, because in the background, these two things will likely be happening. 1. The demand falls as the fad dies off, and 2. Other guys will sooner or later catch on. Therefore, many of them will jump on the bandwagon by copying. The supply will increase and the market becomes saturated. And then this leads to the initial edge that was there to begin with becoming diminished. This whole concept can be simplified to say that supply is just a reaction to demand. It's not like every guy will be able to become a pretty boy overnight. And even if they could, if no one is demanding it, why would they make the changes to their appearance unless they are just speculating? Supply only increases when demand increases first, and in response, guys recognise there's a gap in the market, so they make the necessary lifestyle changes in order to match that demand. And interestingly, the increase in pretty boys isn't the only example of supply reacting to demand. Why do you think so many girls nowadays dye their hair blonde, but almost none do the other way round? Chances are it's because many girls see natural blondes getting way more attention, then in turn they copy this by dyeing their hair blonde too. Same thing happened with the K-pop explosion a few years back. Since that time, we've witnessed a huge new number of guys adopting this style. The general rule for this theory, which is called social learning theory by the way, goes like this. A spike in demand occurs for any reason, like a celebrity adopts a style. Then the men who coincidentally had this style see increased female attention. Then other guys notice and copy these men. Then finally the market gets saturated and the niche is now spoiled. This cycle happens for every niche or trend ever. So as for the future, if this theory holds the most weight, it's likely we'll see a reversal for the effectiveness of Prettyboys, as the supply will only catch up, causing the market to get saturated. Anyway, if you've enjoyed today's content and would like to support the channel by knowing where you stand as a man in attractiveness, I'd recommend checking out my face rating service to find where you fall on this chart. And if you'd also like to know why you received the score you did and looks maxing advice to improve, there are also these packages available at extremely affordable prices. Yes, that's right, I'm not a YouTube con man who will charge you extortionate prices like $50 for a coffee mug. I've served over 10,000 customers so far and have over 3,000 5-star reviews. So if this sounds good to you, click the link below now. I'll see you over there.